Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to you all, wherever you are tuning in from tonight. Maybe cozied up in bed, listening from your favorite quiet corner at home, or perhaps relaxing somewhere peaceful with the world fading away outside. I'm so glad you've joined me here. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Maybe pull the covers up a bit higher, and feel the day gently slip away. Let the story begin. Snow fell softly over the grand facade of the British Embassy in San Marco, muffling the laughter and music that spilled from the ambassador's Christmas ball. Inside, crystal chandeliers blazed. Diplomats in white tie swirled with ladies in silk, and champagne flowed like the Mediterranean beyond the terrace doors. At midnight, as the orchestra struck up "God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen," Sir Reginald Hargrove, His Majesty's ambassador, raised his glass in toast. A moment later he staggered, clutched his throat, and collapsed amid shattered crystal. His face turned blue, foam flecked his lips. By the time the screams began, Sir Reginald was dead, poisoned, and Hercule Poirot, who had accepted the invitation only as a courtesy, found himself at the heart of a most delicate murder. Chapter 1. The Fallen Ambassador. Snow drifted in lazy spirals past the tall embassy windows, blanketing the ancient city of San Marco in a hush that seemed almost conspiratorial. Inside the British Embassy, the ambassador's Christmas ball was in full glittering swing. Crystal chandeliers cast 1,000 fractured rainbows across the marble floor. The orchestra played a lively arrangement of Viennese waltzes, and diplomats, attachés, and their ladies moved in practiced, graceful eddies beneath garlands of holly and mistletoe. Champagne fizzed in flutes, laughter rose in bright cascades, and the air carried the mingled scents of pine, beeswax, and expensive perfume. Hercule Poirot, small, dapper, and impeccably moustached, stood a little apart from the throng. He had accepted Sir Reginald Hargrove's invitation only out of politeness, for the ambassador was an old acquaintance from pre-war days in Brussels. Poirot preferred order and symmetry. Balls, with their swirling unpredictability, usually bored him. Yet tonight he found himself oddly content to observe the subtle maneuverings of power disguised as small talk, the fleeting glances that betrayed alliances and enmities alike. Sir Reginald Hargrove himself dominated the center of the room. Tall, silver-haired, with the easy authority of a man born to privilege and office, he moved from group to group, glass in hand, dispensing charm with diplomatic precision. Beside him, as always, walked his wife, Lady Eleanor, elegant, cool, and still beautiful in her midnight blue velvet gown. 25 years of marriage had not entirely erased the aura of the debutante she had once been. At 11:58 precisely, the orchestra paused. Sir Reginald raised a hand, and the room quieted expectantly. A footman appeared at his elbow with a fresh flute of champagne. Sir Reginald took it, smiling, and turned to address his guests. "My friends," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly, "on this Christmas Eve, in this beautiful city that has welcomed us so generously, let us drink to peace, to friendship between nations, and to the bright promise of the coming year." A murmur of approval rippled through the assembly. Glasses were lifted. Poirot, who had been offered champagne and refused it in favor of a small glass of sirop de cassis, watched with detached amusement. At the stroke of midnight, the orchestra struck up "God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen." Sir Reginald raised his glass higher, smiled broadly, and drank. The effect was almost instantaneous. His smile froze. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble in a spray of crystal and golden liquid. He clutched at his throat, eyes widening in shock. A strangled sound escaped him, half gasp, half cough, and then his knees buckled. He fell heavily amid the wreckage of his flute, body convulsing once, twice, before going terribly still. For a heartbeat, The ballroom remained suspended in disbelief. Then a woman screamed. The sound shattered the spell. Panic rippled outward like circles in a pond. Ladies pressed handkerchiefs to their mouths. Gentlemen surged forward only to halt, uncertain. Poirot moved with surprising speed for so compact a man. He reached the ambassador's side before most others had taken more than a step. Kneeling, he pressed 2 fingers to the carotid artery, then gently lifted one staring eyelid. The pupil was hugely dilated. A faint, acrid odor, bitter almonds, rose from the parted lips. "Cyanide," Poirot said quietly, almost to himself. "Prussic acid. Very swift, very certain." He rose and looked about. The orchestra had fallen silent. Even the gramophone in the adjoining salon seemed to have stopped scratching. Snow tapped softly against the tall French windows, as though the night itself were trying to gain entry. Chief Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard, present because he had been liaising with the local police on a minor smuggling matter, pushed through the crowd, red-faced and breathless. "Poirot!" "Good God, man, what's happened?" "It is murder, mon ami," Poirot replied calmly. "Sir Reginald Hargrove has been poisoned in full view of 200 witnesses, and yet no one, it seems, saw a thing." Lady Eleanor Hargrove stood rooted a few paces away, one gloved hand pressed to her lips. Her face was ashen, but her posture remained erect, almost regal. Only the slight tremor in her fingers betrayed her. "My husband," she whispered. "Reginald, Count Alessandro di Rossi, the young San Marcan attaché, dark, intense, and handsome in the southern manner, stood with fists clenched at his sides. His black eyes burned with an emotion too fierce to be mere shock. Miss Felicity Winters, Sir Reginald's private secretary, a slender young woman with auburn hair piled elegantly atop her head, had sunk into a nearby chair. Tears coursed silently down her cheeks as she stared at the body. Major Clive Beaumont, the military attaché, portly, florid, and fond of whiskey, poured himself a stiff measure from a decanter on a side table, hand shaking so badly that amber liquid splashed onto the lace cloth. Poirot surveyed them all with sharp green eyes. "No one is to leave the building," he announced in a voice that, though quiet, carried absolute authority. "The snow has blocked the roads. The telephone lines, I observe, are conveniently down. We are isolated, mesdames et messieurs, cut off from the world, with a murderer among us." He turned to Japp. "Inspector, secure the doors, and find the glass from which Sir Reginald drank." Japp nodded, and began issuing rapid orders to the embassy footmen, who stood about in stunned paralysis. Poirot knelt again beside the body. The shattered flute lay in pieces. Only the stem remained intact in Sir Reginald's rigid fingers. Carefully, Poirot prized it free. No residue clung to the inner surface, yet the faint almond odor persisted. He straightened and addressed the room at large. "Who handed Sir Reginald his final glass?" Miss Winters raised a trembling hand. I did, Monsieur Poirot. His first glass was nearly empty. I took it to be refilled and brought him a fresh one from the tray by the terrace doors. And the original glass? I left it on the silver tray." Poirot's gaze swept the room. Several silver trays stood on tables and sideboards, laden with empty or half-empty flutes. But none held a glass that matched the heavy crystal stem still clutched in the dead man's hand. The fatal glass had vanished. Poirot twirled one point of his moustache thoughtfully. "Curious," he murmured. "Most curious. The murder is accomplished in full view, yet the instrument disappears beneath the noses of 200 guests. Someone here is very bold, or very desperate." Outside, the snow continued to fall, thick and silent, sealing the embassy in a white cocoon. Inside, fear began to spread more quickly than any poison. Chapter 2. The Secret Treaty. The storm had worsened during the night, piling snow against the embassy doors until they groaned under the weight. By morning, the ancient city of San Marco lay buried beneath a white silence, broken only by the occasional creak of overburdened branches in the gardens. Inside, the ballroom had been cleared of its festive trappings, the shattered crystals swept away, the holly garlands removed, the bloodstain on the marble scrubbed until only a faint shadow remained. Yet the air still carried the chill of death. Hercule Poirot had not slept. He sat now in Sir Reginald Hargrove's private study, a handsome room panelled in dark walnut, its walls lined with leather-bound volumes on diplomacy and history. A fire crackled in the grate, throwing restless shadows across the Turkey carpet. Captain Hastings, who had arrived on the last train before the blizzard closed the passes, hovered anxiously near the door, while Chief Inspector Japp paced with the heavy tread of a man who disliked being cooped up. Poirot, immaculate as ever in a charcoal suit and perfectly scented tie, leaned back in the ambassador's chair and regarded the four principal figures who had been summoned. Lady Eleanor Hargrove sat very straight upon a tapestry sofa, hands folded in her lap. Grief had etched new lines about her mouth, yet her grey eyes remained steady. Beside her, Miss Felicity Winters clutched a sodden handkerchief, her auburn hair escaping its pins in wisps that made her look younger and more vulnerable than her 25 years. Count Alessandro di Rossi stood by the window, staring out at the whited landscape, as though he might find answers in the snow. His profile was sharp, almost hawk-like, and tension vibrated in every line of his lean body. Major Clive Beaumont occupied an armchair near the fire, a half-empty glass of whisky already in his hand, though it was scarcely 10 o'clock. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then he spoke, his voice precise, lightly accented, and deceptively mild. Mesdames et messieurs, we find ourselves in a situation most delicate. A distinguished servant of His Majesty has been murdered under circumstances of exceptional daring. The world outside is cut off. No assistance can reach us. No culprit can escape. Therefore, the truth must be discovered here, among ourselves. He paused, letting his green eyes move from face to face. To begin, I must understand why this particular gathering was assembled on this particular night. Sir Reginald was, I believe, engaged in negotiations of some importance. Lady Eleanor inclined her head. A commercial treaty with San Marco, nothing more than trade concessions and port facilities. Reginald wished to celebrate its near completion with a festive evening. Count de Rossi turned abruptly from the window. His English was excellent, but anger lent it a cutting edge. Commercial? Madam, you are too discreet. The treaty was nothing less than a betrayal. Britain was prepared to recognize Italian claims to our northern provinces, claims without foundation, in exchange for naval basing rights. My country was to be sold like a merchant's commodity. Major Beaumont cleared his throat noisily. Now see here, Count. That's putting it a bit strong. Diplomacy often requires compromise. Compromise? De Rossi's dark eyes flashed. When one side surrenders territory settled for centuries. Poirot raised a small, neatly manicured hand. Un moment. Let us be precise. Major Beaumont, you yourself have interests in San Marcan mining concerns, non? Concerns that would have profited enormously had the treaty passed, and collapsed entirely had it failed. Beaumont's florid face deepened to purple. He set his glass down with a click. That's a damned impertinence, sir. My private investments are no concern of yours. On the contrary, Poirot replied smoothly. When murder is committed, everything becomes the concern of Hercule Poirot. Money, love, patriotism. These are the great motives, and all three appear to be present in abundance. Miss Winters gave a small, involuntary sob. All eyes turned to her. And you, mademoiselle? Poirot's tone softened. You were Sir Reginald's confidential secretary. You typed his letters, kept his appointments, knew his mind perhaps better than anyone. What can you tell us of this treaty? She lifted her tear-stained face. Only that Sir Reginald was troubled in recent weeks. He worked late into the night. Sometimes he seemed angry, sometimes sad. He spoke once of difficult choices that would be misunderstood. Poirot leaned forward. Misunderstood by whom? I do not know. He did not confide the details. Lady Eleanor's voice cut across the room, cool and controlled. My husband was a man of duty. He placed Britain's interests above personal sentiment. If the treaty was unpopular here, that was regrettable, but necessary. Count de Rossi laughed, a short, bitter sound. Necessary for Britain, perhaps, not for San Marco. Jap, who had been listening with growing impatience, now intervened. Look here, we're getting nowhere with politics. What we need are facts. The embassy photographer's darkroom contains potassium cyanide for developing plates, enough missing to kill a dozen men. Anyone could have helped themselves. Poirot nodded. Precisely. And anyone could have observed that Sir Reginald always drank a toast at midnight on festive occasions, a habit known to all his staff and guests. The poisoner needed only to ensure that the fatal dose reached his glass at the crucial moment. He rose and walked to the desk, picking up a silver tray upon which rested several champagne flutes rescued from the ballroom. Observe, the ambassador's first glass was nearly empty. Mademoiselle Winters took it to be refilled. She placed it upon such a tray as this, near the terrace doors, then returned with a fresh flute. In the excitement of the countdown to midnight, attention was fixed upon Sir Reginald. A hand, swift, practiced, could have introduced cyanide to the rim of the original glass. When Mademoiselle brought the fresh one, the ambassador, out of habit, might have taken the familiar stem, or the glasses could have been switched in the confusion. Miss Winters shook her head violently. I did nothing. I only wished to be helpful. Poirot regarded her with sympathy. I do not accuse you, mademoiselle. I merely reconstruct possibilities. But consider, the murderer knew exactly when and how Sir Reginald would drink. That suggests intimate knowledge of his habits. He turned to Lady Eleanor. Madam, you stood at your husband's side throughout the toast. For the first time, her composure wavered. I did, but I saw nothing unusual. And yet, Poirot continued gently, you were ideally placed to observe, or to act. Her chin lifted. Are you suggesting that I poisoned my own husband? I suggest nothing. I merely note positions. Count de Rossi stepped forward. If you seek someone with reason to hate Sir Reginald, look to me. I make no secret of my opposition to the treaty. But I did not kill him. Major Beaumont muttered into his whiskey. Nor I, though God knows the man's death ruins me financially. Poirot's eyes gleamed. 3 motives, all powerful. Betrayal of a country, financial ruin. And, he paused delicately, perhaps the betrayal of a heart. Lady Eleanor rose abruptly. I will not remain to hear such insinuations. She swept from the room, back rigid. The others followed more slowly, each avoiding the other's eyes. Poirot remained by the fire, twirling his moustache. Jap grunted. Well, that stirred them up, but we're no nearer the truth. On the contrary, mon cher Jap, Poirot replied softly. We have established that everyone had reason to wish Sir Reginald dead, and that everyone had opportunity. The little grey cells begin to work. Soon, the pattern will emerge. Outside, the wind rose, driving fresh snow against the windows, like 1,000 impatient fingers demanding entry. And somewhere within the embassy, the murderer listened, and waited, and wondered how much Hercule Poirot already knew. Chapter 3. The Missing Letters. The second day of confinement dawned no brighter than the first. Heavy clouds pressed low over San Marco, and fresh snow continued to fall in thick, relentless curtains. The embassy staff moved about their duties with hushed voices and averted eyes, as though the very walls might be listening. In the ambassador's study, the fire had burned low, but Hercule Poirot had not left his post. Papers lay scattered across the desk, correspondence, appointment diaries, drafts of the ill-fated treaty. Yet none had yielded the secret he sought. Captain Hastings, ever loyal and ever restless, burst into the room shortly after 9, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. "Poirot, you'll never guess what I've found." He held out a pair of fire tongs and gripped carefully between them a fragment of charred paper. Pulled it from the grate in Sir Reginald's bedroom fireplace. The servants hadn't cleared it yet. "Look, there's writing still visible." Poirot took the tongs with delicate precision and carried the fragment to the window, where the grey light fell full upon it. The paper was thin, expensive notepaper, bearing the faint embossed crest of the embassy. Only a few lines remained unburned, the ink browned but legible. "Cannot bear the shame if these forgeries are revealed. Meet me tonight, or I expose everything." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "F," he murmured. "Felicity, perhaps." Hastings nodded eagerly. "It fits, doesn't it?" The girl was his secretary, had access to his handwriting, his personal stationery. "Possible," Poirot conceded, "but we must not leap to conclusions, mon ami. First, we confront Mademoiselle Winters." She was summoned at once. When she entered, wrapped in a dark woolen dress that made her look even more fragile, her eyes were red-rimmed and her hands trembled. At the sight of the burned fragment laid upon a sheet of white blotting paper, she caught her breath. "Where did you find that?" "In Sir Reginald's bedroom grate," Poirot replied evenly. "You recognize it?" She hesitated, then nodded. "It is from a letter I wrote to him 3 weeks ago." "But it was not what you think. Explain, if you please." Miss Winters sank into a chair, twisting her handkerchief into knots. Someone had been forging love letters, letters supposedly from Sir Reginald to me. Intimate, compromising letters. They began arriving at my desk, hidden among ordinary correspondence. At first I thought it a cruel joke, but then one was left where Lady Eleanor might find it. I went to Sir Reginald in terror. He was furious, not with me, but with whoever sought to ruin us both. He told me to write that note, demanding a meeting with the blackmailer. He said he would handle it himself. And did the meeting take place? I do not know. He never spoke of it again. Poirot studied her closely. You say us both. You feared for your reputation, and for his. She lifted her chin. Sir Reginald was kind to me. He treated me almost as a daughter. There was never anything improper between us. But appearances, in diplomatic circles, appearances are everything. At that moment, the door opened again, and Lady Eleanor entered unannounced. She had clearly overheard the last words, for her expression was icy. Appearances, she repeated softly. Yes, my husband was always most concerned with appearances. She crossed to the desk and looked down at the charred fragment. I found similar letters, she said, her voice steady but brittle. In Felicity's handwriting, addressed to him, passionate, pleading letters. And then I discovered that he had altered his will, leaving her £20,000. Miss Winters sprang to her feet. That is untrue. I knew nothing of any legacy. Lady Eleanor regarded her with cold pity. Perhaps not. But Reginald told me himself that he intended to provide for you, generously, after his death. He said you had earned it through loyal service. I wondered then if loyalty was all it had been. Poirot intervened smoothly. Madam, when did Sir Reginald inform you of this change to his will? 2 months ago. He had his solicitor in London draw up the codicil during our last leave. And the forged letters, when did they first appear? Miss Winters answered. About 6 weeks ago. Poirot's moustache twitched. Interesting timing. The forgeries begin after the legacy is arranged. Someone wished to cast suspicion upon Mademoiselle, or upon Sir Reginald himself. The door burst open for a 3rd time. Major Beaumont strode in, his face thunderous. While you're all playing detective, something far worse has happened. The treaty documents, the final signed copies, have vanished from the safe. Poirot's eyebrows rose sharply. The safe in this very room. Beaumont nodded. Combination known only to Sir Reginald and myself. I opened it this morning to check them. Gone. Nothing else touched. Hastings whistled. That's torn it. If those papers reach the wrong hands, they will not, Poirot said firmly, because they have not left the embassy. The snow sees to that. Therefore, the thief is still among us. He turned to Beaumont. Major, you would have profited greatly had the treaty been signed and ratified. Its disappearance ruins you financially, does it not? Beaumont's jaw worked. Yes, damn it. But I didn't kill Reggie, and I didn't steal the blasted papers. I wanted them published, signed, sealed, and delivered. Count de Rossi appeared in the doorway, silent as a shadow. He had clearly been listening. Perhaps, he said quietly, someone wished to prevent publication at any cost. His dark gaze moved from face to face, accusing, yet oddly satisfied. Poirot clapped his hands once, sharply. Enough! We have new facts. A burned letter threatening exposure of forgeries. A legacy to Mademoiselle Winters. And now the disappearance of documents that could have changed the balance of power in the Mediterranean. All connected, assuredly. He moved to the window and gazed out at the endless white expanse. Observe the gardens, he said. Footprints lead from the terrace doors to the photographer's outbuilding, where the cyanide was kept. And then, nothing. The return journey was made by another route, or the tracks were deliberately brushed away. Someone was very careful. He turned back to the room. But not careful enough. For Hercule Poirot, no detail is too small. The pattern begins to form. Motives multiply. Love, money, patriotism, fear of scandal. And at the center, a dead man who knew too much, or, perhaps, not enough. Lady Eleanor's voice cut through the silence. You speak of scandal, Monsieur Poirot. My husband's death is already the greatest scandal. What more can there be? Poirot met her gaze steadily. Much more, madame. For someone in this house was prepared to kill to keep a secret buried. And secrets, like snow, have a way of melting under the heat of investigation. Outside, the wind moaned around the eaves, and the snow continued to fall, thick and implacable, hiding every trace of what had passed in the night. But inside the embassy, the past was beginning to rise, dark and dangerous, from its hastily dug grave. Chapter 4. The Poisoned Toast. By the afternoon of Christmas Day, the embassy had begun to feel less like a diplomatic residence and more like a gilded prison. The snow had ceased at last, but drifts lay piled against the doors and windows, and the roads beyond the gates remained impassable. Servants whispered in corridors, guests avoided one another's eyes. Even the evergreen garlands in the hall seemed to droop under the weight of unspoken suspicion. Hercule Poirot, however, was in his element. He had ordered the ballroom left exactly as it had been on the night of the ball, save for the removal of the body. The orchestra platform stood empty. The chandeliers, unlit now, hung like frozen waterfalls. The faint shadow on the marble floor marked the place where Sir Reginald Hargrove had fallen. Poirot walked the room slowly, measuring distances with his eyes, noting sightlines, pausing now and then to murmur to himself in French. At 3 o'clock, he summoned everyone once more to the scene of the crime. Lady Eleanor entered first, pale, but composed in a severe black gown. Count de Rossi followed, his face a mask of controlled anger. Major Beaumont came next, smelling faintly of whiskey and resentment. Miss Winters appeared last, supported by Captain Hastings, who had taken something of a protective attitude toward the young woman. Chief Inspector Japp stood by the terrace doors, arms folded, watching the proceedings with professional interest. Poirot positioned himself in the center of the room, beneath the great chandelier. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice clear and precise, it is time for a little experiment. We shall reconstruct the fatal moment. Not perfectly. Murder cannot be perfectly recreated, but sufficiently to illuminate the truth. At his signal, footmen entered bearing silver trays laden with champagne flutes, filled with sparkling water, in place of wine. Others carried fresh garlands to restore the festive appearance. The orchestra was absent, but Poirot had arranged for a gramophone to play the same waltz that had preceded the midnight toast. Each person was directed to their exact position, as remembered from Christmas Eve. Lady Eleanor stood where she had stood beside her husband. Count de Rossi took his place near the orchestra platform. Major Beaumont positioned himself by the buffet table. Miss Winters was placed near the terrace doors, close to the silver tray that had held the refilled glasses. Poirot himself assumed the role of Sir Reginald, standing in the marked spot on the floor. "Now," he said, "we begin at 11:58. Mademoiselle Winters, you notice that the ambassador's glass is nearly empty. You take it from him, thus, and carry it to the tray for refilling." Miss Winters obeyed, her movements hesitant but accurate. She placed an empty flute upon the tray and lifted a full one. "You return to Sir Reginald," Poirot continued, "and hand him the fresh glass." The orchestra pauses. Sir Reginald prepares to speak. Attention is upon him. The countdown to midnight begins. He paused, letting the gramophone waltz fill the silence. In this moment of distraction, glasses raised, eyes fixed upon the speaker, what happens to the discarded glass upon the tray? All eyes turned to the silver tray by the terrace doors. It held only the single empty flute Miss Winters had just placed there. Japp stepped forward. "We've searched every inch of this room, Poirot. No other glass matching the ambassador's heavy crystal stem has been found." "Precisely," Poirot said. "Yet on the night of the murder, that original glass vanished completely. Someone removed it, deliberately." Lady Eleanor spoke for the first time, her voice cool. "Perhaps a footman cleared it away in the confusion after my husband fell." Poirot shook his head. "No, madame. The footmen were questioned exhaustively. None touched that tray until after the doctor had been summoned, and yet the glass was gone." Count de Rossi frowned. "Then it must have contained the poison, and the murderer removed the evidence." "A reasonable supposition," Poirot agreed. "But consider, cyanide acts swiftly. Sir Reginald drank, staggered within seconds, and fell. There was barely time for anyone to reach the tray, seize the glass, and conceal it before attention shifted from the dying man." Major Beaumont cleared his throat. "Unless the poison was in the second glass, the one the girl brought back." Miss Winters gave a small cry. "No, I took it directly from the tray. It was poured in full view of dozens of guests." Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Let us examine that possibility. If the poison was introduced to the fresh glass while it stood upon the tray, anyone passing could have done it. But again, time is against us." The orchestra was about to resume. Guests were turning toward the center of the room. A murderer would have needed extraordinary nerve to tamper openly with a glass about to be handed to the ambassador. He moved to the tray and lifted the empty flute Miss Winters had placed there moments before. Yet something was done. Observe. With deliberate care, he wrapped the stem in a silk handkerchief and carried it to the light. Then, holding it aloft, he pointed to the rim. "See? A faint, crystalline residue, almost invisible. On the night of the murder, such residue upon the original glass would dissolve instantly when wetted by the first sip. But if the glass was then wiped clean, perhaps unconsciously, by a nervous hand holding a napkin, and replaced upon the tray." He turned to Miss Winters. "Mademoiselle, when you took the nearly empty glass from Sir Reginald, did you wrap it in a napkin?" She stared at him, eyes wide. Yes, I always did. It was a habit." He disliked sticky fingerprints on the crystal. "And when you returned with the fresh glass, did you notice anything unusual about the original?" "No, only that it had been moved slightly upon the tray." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Moved. Exactly. Someone exchanged the glasses in the brief moment while you were away. The original, now clean of poison residue, but bearing the ambassador's familiar fingerprints upon the stem, was left in plain sight. The fresh glass, its rim newly coated with cyanide crystals, was the one you handed to Sir Reginald. The room was silent save for the faint ticking of a distant clock. Lady Eleanor's voice cut through the quiet like ice cracking. "You are saying that someone stood at that tray, performed this sleight of hand, and no one noticed?" "Someone who belonged there," Poirot replied softly. "Someone whose presence excited no comment. Someone who could brush against the tray in the natural movement of the crowd, exchange glasses in a second, and step away, all while every eye was upon the ambassador preparing his toast." His gaze moved slowly across the assembled faces, lingering for a fraction longer upon Lady Eleanor. Major Beaumont muttered, "Damned clever, if true." Count de Rossi's dark eyes narrowed. But who would take such a risk? "Someone desperate," Poirot said. "Someone who believed that Sir Reginald's death was the only way to prevent a greater catastrophe, personal or public." He set the wrapped glass carefully upon the tray. "We have established how the poison was administered. The question that remains is why, and by whose hand?" Miss Winters swayed, her face deathly pale. Hastings caught her arm as she sank toward the floor. As servants hurried forward with smelling salts, Poirot murmured to Japp, "Bring me the embassy's photographic plates, and the guest list annotated with every person's exact position at midnight. The little grey cells require more nourishment." Outside, the weak winter sun began to sink behind the snow-laden peaks, casting long blue shadows across the gardens. Inside the ballroom, the reconstruction was over, but the echoes of that fatal midnight lingered, growing sharper and more dangerous with every passing hour. The murderer, whoever they were, now knew that Hercule Poirot was closer than ever to the truth. Chapter 5. The Darkroom Revelation. The short winter afternoon faded quickly into twilight, and the embassy's electric lights flickered on one by one, casting a harsh, unnatural glow over corridors that had known only candle and chandelier on the night of the ball. Hercule Poirot, wrapped in a thick Vicomte overcoat against the creeping cold, led Chief Inspector Japp and Captain Hastings down a narrow service passage to the photographer's outbuilding. The little stone structure stood detached from the main house, connected only by a covered walkway now half buried in snow. Its windows glowed faintly red, the safe light of the darkroom within. Poirot paused at the door. "Here is the source of our poison, potassium cyanide, used to fix photographic plates, odorless in dry form, swift and deadly when dissolved, and, as we have established, a small quantity is missing." He pushed open the door. The air inside was sharp with chemicals. Developer, stopper, fixer. Trays lined a long bench, drying lines crisscrossed overhead like a spider's web strung with blank, dripping prints. A single red bulb burned above the sink, bathing everything in blood-like light. Japp held up a lantern to supplement the dim glow. "Fingerprints all over the place. Staff use it regularly. But the cyanide bottle has fresh marks. We'll compare them tomorrow, when the local man arrives with his kit." Poirot was already at the bench, peering into the trays with a pocket magnifying glass. He lifted a glass stirring rod, examined it, then carefully raised a negative still hanging to dry. "Regardez," he murmured. He held the negative to the safe light. The image slowly resolved. Sir Reginald and Miss Felicity Winters in the embassy garden on a sunny autumn day. They stood close beside a rose arbor. The ambassador's hand rested lightly upon the young woman's shoulder as he pointed to something beyond the frame. To a casual glance it might seem paternal. To a jealous eye it could appear intimate. Hastings gave a low whistle. "Dash it, Poirot! That's compromising, all right." "Or meant to appear so," Poirot replied. "Observe the angle. Taken from concealment behind foliage. Someone wished to capture a moment that could be misinterpreted." Japp grunted. "Blackmail, then? Perhaps. Or the foundation for suspicion." Poirot laid the negative aside and opened a drawer. Inside lay several more plates, some developed, some not. One envelope was labeled in neat copper plate, "Garden Party, October." He removed a print and studied it intently. See here, the same day, the same arbor, but in this photograph, taken openly, Lady Eleanor stands between Sir Reginald and Mademoiselle Winters. A happy trio, yet someone chose to develop only the image that excludes Madame. The implications hung heavy in the chemical-laden air. They returned to the main house, the negative carefully wrapped in tissue. Poirot summoned Lady Eleanor first to the small morning room that had become his temporary headquarters. She entered with the same erect carriage, but her eyes were wary now. When Poirot laid the garden photograph upon the table before her, her breath caught. "Where did you find this?" "In the darkroom, madame. Recently developed." She stared at it for a long moment. "I remember the day, a perfect autumn afternoon. Reginald was showing Felicity the new rose he had grafted himself. I stepped away for a moment to speak to the gardener, and this, I suppose, is what resulted." Her voice hardened. "I found other things too. Letters in Felicity's hand, hidden in Reginald's desk. Pleading letters, loving letters." Poirot inclined his head. "And yet, we have evidence that letters supposedly in Sir Reginald's hand, love letters to Mademoiselle, were forgeries." Lady Eleanor's lips thinned. "So she claims." "Non, madame. The burned fragment recovered from the grate was in her hand, yes, but it was a warning to the forger, written at Sir Reginald's request. He sought to protect her." Lady Eleanor's composure cracked for the first time. Pain flashed across her features. "Protect her? From what? From me? From scandal? From whoever sought to destroy them both?" Major Beaumont was brought in next. Shown the photograph, he barked a humorless laugh. "Old Reggie always did have an eye for a pretty girl. Can't say I blame him. Stuck out here with nothing but politics and protocol." Poirot regarded him steadily. "And you, Major? The missing treaty would have secured your fortune. Its disappearance threatens ruin." Beaumont's bonhomie vanished. "I've said before, I wanted that treaty signed." "Killing Reggie achieved the opposite. Unless," Poirot said softly, "someone wished to ensure it could never be resurrected." Beaumont shifted uncomfortably. Count de Rossi entered last, summoned from the library where he had been reading dispatches by candlelight. He glanced at the photograph with patent contempt. "So the English ambassador not only sells my country but dishonors his wife. Perhaps, after all, justice was done." Poirot's green eyes narrowed. "You knew of the forged letters, Count?" De Rossi hesitated, then shrugged. "Rumors reached our legation. Such scandals are useful currency in diplomacy." "And the photograph? I have never seen it before." As the Count turned to leave, Poirot's sharp gaze caught a detail, a faint bluish stain upon the cuff of de Rossi's otherwise immaculate white evening shirt, visible now in the lamplight. Japp noticed it too. "Fixer stain," he confirmed later, when the Count had gone. "Hypo-sodium thiosulfate. Common enough in a darkroom." "Common," Poirot agreed, "but suggestive. Someone has been handling photographic chemicals recently, and not carefully." That evening, as the household gathered for a somber Christmas dinner that no one truly tasted, another discovery was quietly made. A footman, clearing Lady Eleanor's bedroom fire in preparation for the night, found fresh ashes in the grate. Among them, carefully retrieved, were the charred corners of heavy official paper bearing the faint watermark of His Majesty's stationery office. The treaty documents, or what remained of them, had been burned in Lady Eleanor's room. Poirot received the news in silence, his small hands folded upon the table before him. "So," he said at last to Japp and Hastings, "the circle tightens. The poison comes from the darkroom. Compromising photographs are developed there, and the treaty that so many wished either to save or destroy ends its existence in Madame's fireplace." Hastings frowned. "But if Lady Eleanor burned the treaty, she must have taken it from the safe. Yet only Beaumont and Sir Reginald knew the combination." "Exactly, mon ami. Either Sir Reginald removed the documents himself before his death, perhaps intending to reconsider, or someone else possessed the combination." Japp rubbed his chin. Or someone forced it from him before killing him. Poirot shook his head. No signs of violence. No, the murderer relied upon subtlety. Cyanide on a champagne rim, documents spirited away and burned. A woman's crime, perhaps? Or a diplomat's? He rose and walked to the window. Outside, the snow had begun again, soft and relentless, erasing the last visible traces of footprints between house and darkroom. "But snow melts," Poirot murmured, "and secrets, like footprints, cannot remain hidden forever. Tomorrow, mes amis, we shall force the truth into the open." In the hushed embassy, candles guttered in their sockets, and every occupant lay awake listening to the wind, wondering whose door Hercule Poirot would knock upon when morning came. The darkroom had yielded its secrets, but the darkest secret of all still waited in the heart of the murderer. Chapter 6. The Second Glass. The morning of the third day broke clear and bitterly cold. Sunlight glittered on the snow-covered gardens like scattered diamonds, but inside the embassy, the atmosphere remained heavy with suspicion and dread. Roads were still blocked, the telephone lines remained dead. The little world of the British Embassy in San Marco was still sealed tight, holding its secrets, and its murderer close. Hercule Poirot had spent the night in thought, pacing the ambassador's study with silent tread, arranging and rearranging the facts in his mind, as neatly as the objects upon his dressing table. By breakfast he was ready. He sent word that all must assemble once more in the ballroom, at 11 o'clock precisely. They came reluctantly. Lady Eleanor, pale but immaculate in black, entered first and took a chair near the cold fireplace. Count de Rossi followed, his dark eyes watchful. Major Beaumont arrived last, nursing what appeared to be a severe headache. Miss Winters, still fragile, was escorted by Hastings, who hovered protectively. Japp stood at the door, solid and impassive. Poirot waited until the gramophone clock upon the mantel struck the hour. Then he began, his voice calm, almost conversational. "Mesdames et messieurs, I have kept you in suspense long enough. Today, the truth shall be revealed. But first, I must confess something to you." A stir ran through the room. "I have lied." Gasps rose. Major Beaumont half rose from his chair. "Lied? About what, man?" "About the manner of the poisoning," Poirot replied serenely. "Yesterday, during our reconstruction, I told you that the poison was placed upon the rim of the second glass, the fresh glass Mademoiselle Winters brought to Sir Reginald. That was not true." Miss Winters gave a small, bewildered cry. Poirot continued, "The poison was, in fact, upon the rim of the first glass, the one Sir Reginald held throughout the evening. Cyanide crystals, colorless, tasteless, dissolve instantly in liquid. A few grains upon the rim would be unnoticeable. Sir Reginald drank steadily during the hour before midnight. With each sip, a little more poison entered his system, enough to weaken, but not yet to kill. Then, when the final toast came, the last fatal trace dissolved." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "But we found the original glass clean," Hastings burst out. "Exactly, mon ami. Because after Sir Reginald fell, someone wiped the rim carefully, perhaps with a napkin already soaked in champagne from the spilled flute, and removed all trace of the crystals. That same person then concealed the glass, only to return it later to the tray, where it appeared perfectly innocent." Lady Eleanor's voice was sharp, but Felicity herself carried the nearly empty glass to the tray. If the poison was already in it. "Non, madame," Poirot interrupted gently. Mademoiselle Winters took the glass, wrapped it in a napkin, as was her habit, and placed it upon the tray. In the brief minute she was absent fetching the fresh flute, the murderer acted. He, or she, removed the poisoned glass entirely, substituted a clean one, bearing Sir Reginald's fingerprints, taken from any of the many objects he had handled that evening, and pocketed the fatal evidence. Count de Rossi leaned forward. "Then the glass we later found hidden beneath the palm was the original, wiped clean and returned to mislead us. A clever touch, but not clever enough. Major Beaumont mopped his brow. This is all very ingenious, Poirot, but it proves nothing. Anyone near the tray could have done it. Anyone, Poirot agreed, but only one person had the motive, the opportunity, and the precise knowledge required. He turned suddenly to Lady Eleanor. Madame, you stood beside your husband throughout the evening. You saw Mademoiselle Winters take the nearly empty glass. You knew she would return with a fresh one. In that short interval, while attention was turning toward the coming toast, you stepped to the tray, ostensibly to set down your own glass, and performed the exchange. Later, when chaos erupted, you retrieved the substituted clean glass and hid it, only to replace it when suspicion might fall elsewhere. Lady Eleanor's face had gone very white, but her voice remained steady. That is a monstrous accusation. Why should I kill my husband? Because, Poirot said softly, you believed he was unfaithful. The forged love letters, the compromising photograph, the legacy of £20,000 to his secretary, all convinced you that he intended to leave you, or at the very least, to humiliate you publicly. You could not bear the scandal. And when you discovered he had removed the treaty from the safe, perhaps intending to destroy it himself, you feared exposure on every front. He took a step closer. You took cyanide from the darkroom weeks ago, planning perhaps only to threaten him. But on Christmas Eve, seeing him smile at Mademoiselle Winters, hearing the orchestra prepare the toast, you acted. A few crystals upon the rim, swift, silent, certain. Then, later, you burned the treaty in your own grate to ensure no trace remained of what you believed was his final betrayal. Lady Eleanor stared at him for a long moment. Then, astonishingly, she laughed, a low, broken sound. You are very clever, Monsieur Poirot. Too clever. The room froze. Suddenly Count de Rossi sprang to his feet. No, it was I who poisoned him, for the honor of my country. Major Beaumont lurched upright. Rubbish! I did it, to save my fortune. Miss Winters began to sob. I forged the letters on Italian orders. I am to blame. Each, in frantic succession, claimed the guilt. Poirot raised both hands, palms outward. Silence! I implore you, silence. These gallant confessions do credit to your hearts, but not to your veracity. Only one person knew every detail: the darkroom visits, the exact timing of the toast, the legacy, the forged letters, the treaty's hiding place. He turned back to Lady Eleanor, his eyes compassionate but relentless. You, madame, you acted from wounded pride and misplaced jealousy. Sir Reginald was innocent of infidelity. He sought only to shield a young woman caught in a web of espionage. The forged letters were meant to compromise him into supporting the treaty. When he discovered the plot, he protected Mademoiselle Winters and paid for that kindness with his life. Lady Eleanor rose slowly. All colour had drained from her face, but her head remained high. Yes, she said at last, very quietly. I killed him. I thought he no longer loved me. I could not bear the shame. She looked toward Miss Winters, tears glittering in her eyes for the first time. Forgive me, child. I was wrong. About everything. Japp stepped forward, his face grim. Lady Eleanor Hargrove, I arrest you for the murder of Sir Reginald Hargrove. As the handcuffs clicked softly into place, Poirot turned away, his expression somber. Outside, the sun shone brilliantly upon the snow, but inside the ballroom, a deeper winter had settled, one that no spring would ever thaw. Chapter 7. The Lady's Confession. The ballroom, so lately the scene of revelry and death, now felt like a courtroom. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, striking cold sparks from the chandeliers and laying a merciless brightness over every face. Lady Eleanor Hargrove stood motionless between Chief Inspector Japp and a silent footman,
her wrists encircled by steel that glinted incongruously against her black lace cuffs. Yet even in defeat, she retained an austere dignity, as though the handcuffs were merely an unfamiliar ornament. Hercule Poirot regarded her with genuine sorrow.
"Madame," he said softly, "it is not necessary that you say more. The evidence is complete." But Lady Eleanor shook her head, almost imperiously. "No, Monsieur Poirot. I have lived with deception too long. Let the truth be spoken plainly, while I still have the courage." She drew a deep, steadying breath and addressed the room. "3 months ago, I began to suspect that Reginald's affections had turned elsewhere. Little things. A new tenderness in his voice when he spoke of Felicity, late nights in his study, the way he would smile at some private thought. Then, I found the letters, hidden in a locked drawer to which I had long known the key. Letters in Felicity's handwriting, full of devotion, pleading for meetings, signed with endearments no secretary should use." Miss Winters made a small sound of distress, but Lady Eleanor continued remorselessly. "I confronted him. He denied everything, of course. Said the letters were forgeries, part of some diplomatic intrigue. But his denials rang hollow. And when I learned from our solicitor in London that he had added a codicil leaving Felicity £20,000, my last doubt vanished. I believed he intended to divorce me quietly after the treaty was signed and return to England with her." Her voice wavered for the first time. 30 years of marriage, Monsieur Poirot. 30 years of duty, of hosting his dinners, smoothing his path, bearing his childless house with grace. And in the end, to be discarded for a girl barely older than the daughter we never had. I could not bear the humiliation. Count de Rossi looked away, embarrassment or pity upon his dark features. Major Beaumont stared at the floor. Lady Eleanor went on more quietly. "I had visited the darkroom often. Reginald was proud of his photographic hobby and liked to show me his prints. I knew where the cyanide was kept. Weeks ago, in a moment of blind rage, I took a small quantity, telling myself it was only to frighten him, to force a confession. But on Christmas Eve, watching him laugh with her, seeing the new will's legacy hanging over us like a sword, something snapped within me." She closed her eyes briefly. "When Felicity took his nearly empty glass to be refilled, I saw my chance. No one was watching the tray. All eyes were turning toward the coming toast. I had the crystals in a twist of tissue in my glove. I brushed against the tray, unwrapped them, dusted the rim of his original glass. Only a few grains, enough. Then I stepped back. When Felicity returned with the fresh flute, he took his old one by habit. The stem was familiar in his hand. He drank, and 30 seconds later, her voice broke entirely. I did not mean it to be so public. I thought only that he would sicken later, in private. But the final sip at the toast was too much. I watched him die in front of 200 people, and still I could not confess." Miss Winters rose, tears streaming down her face. "Lady Eleanor, it was never true. Sir Reginald was protecting me. Italian agents forced me to forge those letters in his handwriting, letters supposedly from him to me. They meant to compromise him into supporting the treaty. When he discovered the plot, he refused to yield. He said he would expose everything rather than betray Britain or San Marco. The legacy was his way of ensuring I could escape to safety if danger followed." Lady Eleanor stared at her, comprehension dawning like slow poison. "Then he never—" "No," Miss Winters whispered. "He was kind, paternal, nothing more. He spoke of you often, with admiration and regret that he had caused you pain." A single tear traced its way down Lady Eleanor's cheek, the first and only one. "I have killed an innocent man," she said wonderingly. "And destroyed myself for a lie." Poirot stepped forward. "Madame, the human heart is capable of great error when wounded. Sir Reginald died trying to shield a young woman who reminded him, perhaps, of what might have been. You acted from misplaced pride and jealousy." 2 tragedies, born of misunderstanding. He turned to the others. Count de Rossi knew of the forgery, but chose silence, hoping the scandal would derail the treaty without bloodshed. Major Beaumont profited neither way. Mademoiselle Winters suffered coercion, and now carries guilt that is not hers. All of you, in your separate ways, contributed to the climate in which this crime became possible. Japp cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, that's that then. We'll hold Lady Eleanor until the road's clear and proper authorities can take over. Lady Eleanor lifted her head. There is one last thing. Tell the newspapers, if you must, that Sir Reginald died of heart failure. Spare him. Spare us both. The final indignity of scandal. Poirot bowed slightly. That, madame, is in the hands of higher powers than mine. But I think, in this case, discretion will prevail. Diplomacy, after all, is the art of the possible. As Japp led her away, her footsteps echoed down the long corridor with measured calm. The door closed behind them. In the sudden silence, Poirot sighed deeply. Another puzzle solved, mes amis. But the taste is bitter. Pride and misunderstanding, always the most lethal poisons. He walked to the window and gazed out at the glittering snow. Christmas, he murmured, when peace and goodwill should reign. Instead, we have only the peace of the grave. Behind him, the ballroom stood empty, waiting for servants to strip away the last traces of holly and candle wax. The ambassador's Christmas ball was over, forever. Chapter 8. The Treaty's Fate. In the late afternoon, with the sun already sinking behind the snow-capped peaks that ringed San Marco, Hercule Poirot, Captain Hastings, and Count Alessandro de Rossi gathered in the small library. A newly lit fire crackled on the hearth, driving back the chill that had settled over the house like a pall. The treaty, the cause of so much bitterness, was now nothing more than grey ash scattered through Lady Eleanor's bedroom grate. Count de Rossi stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, gazing out over the white gardens. "The treaty is destroyed," he said at last, his voice low. "My country is safe, for the present. The Italian claims will not be recognized by Britain, at least not this year, perhaps not ever." Poirot, seated in a wing chair with his feet precisely together, regarded the young man thoughtfully. "And yet, Count, you do not appear entirely satisfied." De Rossi turned. For once, the mask of diplomatic composure had slipped. Weariness and something close to shame showed in his dark eyes. "Satisfied? No, Monsieur Poirot. A man is dead. A woman, proud, honorable in her own way, faces ruin. All because I chose silence when I might have spoken." He crossed to the fire and held out his hands to the flames. "I knew of the forged letters. Whispers reached our legation. Italian agents boasting of their cleverness. I could have warned Sir Reginald openly. Instead, I hoped the scandal would discredit the treaty without forcing my government into open confrontation. I allowed suspicion to fester. In a sense, I helped create the poison that killed him." Poirot twirled his moustache gently. "Regret is easy after the event, mon ami. But you did not place cyanide upon the glass." "No," de Rossi admitted. "That was Lady Eleanor's act. Yet we all played our parts in the tragedy." Major Beaumont's heavy tread sounded in the corridor. He appeared in the doorway, coat buttoned against the cold, a valise in his hand. "Roads open at last," he announced gruffly. "Military convoy got through with snowplows. I'm off on the evening train." He hesitated, then added, "Ruined, of course. Investments tied to that blasted treaty, but alive and free. Can't complain, I suppose." He glanced at Poirot. "You did your job, sir. Cleanly. No diplomatic incident. Foreign Office will be grateful." Poirot inclined his head. "The truth is always preferable, Major, even when inconvenient." Beaumont gave a short, humorless laugh and departed without further farewell. Miss Felicity Winters appeared soon after, cloaked and hatted, a small suitcase at her feet.
Her face was pale but composed. "I too am leaving," she said quietly. "The Foreign Office has arranged discreet passage to England."
A new name, perhaps a new life. I shall never forget Sir Reginald's kindness, or Lady Eleanor's suffering. She looked at Poirot with earnest gratitude. "You believed me when no one else did, monsieur. Thank you." Poirot rose and bowed. "It is the little grey cells that deserve thanks, mademoiselle. They merely arranged the facts in their proper order." When she had gone, Japp lumbered in, rubbing his hands. "Everything tied up neat as you like. Lady Eleanor's being taken to the capital under guard tonight. Quiet transfer, no press. Official cause of death: heart failure brought on by overexertion at the ball. Treaty negotiations suspended due to unforeseen circumstances. The usual diplomatic whitewash." Poirot permitted himself a small smile. Better a hushed scandal than an international crisis, perhaps. Japp grunted agreement. "Still, it's a rum business, all that death and ruin over pride and misunderstanding." He paused at the door. "Coming, Poirot? Train leaves in an hour." "In a moment, Inspector." Alone with Hastings, Poirot stood before the fire a little longer. "The treaty's fate is sealed in ash," he said reflectively. "San Marco remains independent. For now, Britain avoids entanglement. Italy is denied its prize. And yet no one truly wins." Hastings nodded slowly. "Poor Lady Eleanor. Do you think she'll hang?" "Non, mon ami. Not in 1936. Influence, quiet negotiations, perhaps a plea of temporary insanity. She will vanish into some private institution, her name erased from society. A living death, but death nonetheless." He sighed. "Come, let us leave this house of sorrow." As they stepped out onto the embassy steps, the crisp mountain air struck their faces. The snow sparkled under a clear, starlit sky. Somewhere below in the valley, a train whistle sounded, a thin, mournful note echoing across the white silence. The ambassador's Christmas ball was ended, its secrets buried deep beneath diplomatic discretion and alpine snow. But for Hercule Poirot, the memory of a proud woman's confession and a good man's needless death would linger long after the snows melted. Chapter 9. Poirot reflects. The embassy lay hushed under the starlit sky, its windows dark at last. Most of the staff had retired, and the remaining guests, now merely witnesses in a tragedy, had sought the refuge of their rooms. Only Hercule Poirot lingered on the terrace, wrapped in his heavy overcoat, a small Russian cigarette glowing between his gloved fingers. The snow had ceased entirely. The air was crisp and motionless, as though the world itself held its breath. Below him, the gardens stretched away in unbroken white, every footprint from the past days now erased. The photographer's outbuilding stood silent, its red safe-light extinguished. Somewhere within the house, Lady Eleanor awaited transfer under quiet guard, her proud spirit already beginning its long imprisonment. Poirot exhaled a thin plume of smoke that hung momentarily in the frost before dissolving. "Christmas," he said softly to the empty night. "Noel. The season of peace on earth, of goodwill toward men. And yet here, in this beautiful place, we have only pride, jealousy, and death." Captain Hastings emerged from the French doors, muffled in scarf and greatcoat. "Not turning in yet, Poirot?" Poirot shook his head. "I reflect, mon cher. The case is closed," the murderer confessed, "the motives laid bare. And still the little grey cells are not entirely satisfied." Hastings stamped his feet against the cold. "But you solved it brilliantly, as always. Lady Eleanor did it, driven half mad by those forged letters and the legacy." "Everything fits. Everything fits," Poirot agreed. "And yet, the human heart does not always fit neatly into our patterns. Sir Reginald was a good man, dutiful, honourable, perhaps a little vain. He sought to protect a young woman who reminded him of lost possibilities. Lady Eleanor was a proud woman who mistook protection for betrayal.
2 lives destroyed by a misunderstanding that a single honest conversation might have prevented. He flicked ash into the snow. And the others, Count de Rossi silent for patriotism, Major Beaumont grasping for money, Miss Winters coerced into forgery. All of them dancing around the truth like figures in some grim masquerade, until one stepped too far and death claimed the floor. Hastings shivered, though not entirely from cold. Will Lady Eleanor hang, do you think? Poirot considered the stars. In England, in this year of 1936, unlikely. There will be influence, discreet medical opinions, perhaps a finding of temporary insanity brought on by grief. She will disappear into some quiet establishment, alive, but erased, a punishment more refined than the rope, and in its way more cruel. He drew a last breath from the cigarette and ground it carefully beneath his heel. Justice is served, Hastings, but mercy is absent. That is the tragedy of such affairs. The little grey cells can reveal the murderer, but they cannot heal the wounds that drove her to murder. He turned toward the doors. Come, the train leaves early. Let us leave this house to its ghosts. As they stepped inside, the great doors closed with a soft, final thud, shutting out the glittering snow and the silent gardens beyond. In the morning, the embassy would awaken to routine again. Dispatches, protocol, the careful pretense that nothing irreparable had occurred. But for Hercule Poirot, the memory of a fallen ambassador and a broken wife would travel with him, a small, indelible shadow amid the triumphs of detection. Chapter 10. Farewell to San Marco. The morning train to the capital wound slowly down through the mountain passes, its wheels crunching over freshly cleared tracks. Snow still lay deep on either side, but the sky was a hard, brilliant blue, and sunlight poured into the first-class compartment where Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings sat opposite one another. Poirot, impeccably turned out in a charcoal travelling suit and discreetly polished shoes, gazed out at the receding peaks with an expression of quiet satisfaction. The case was closed. The murderer confessed. The tangled threads of motive and deception neatly tied. Yet a faint shadow lingered in his green eyes. Hastings, wrapped in a thick tweed coat, stretched his legs and attempted cheerfulness. Well, Poirot, another triumph. You unravelled it all. Forged letters, poisoned glass, burned treaty. The Foreign Office ought to give you a medal. Poirot smiled faintly. Medals, mon cher, are for soldiers. Detectives receive only the satisfaction of order restored, and sometimes even that is incomplete. He removed a small Morocco leather notebook from his pocket and flipped through its pages, pausing at the final entry. See here, Hastings, I have noted the last messages. He read aloud in his precise, lightly accented voice. From Count de Rossi, delivered as we boarded. You have saved my country embarrassment, and perhaps a war. San Marco will not forget. Hastings nodded. Decent of him. From Mademoiselle Winters, handed to me with tears. Sir Reginald said, you were the greatest detective alive. Now I know he was right. Thank you for giving me back my future. Poirot closed the notebook. And from Lady Eleanor, passed through Jap this morning before her transfer. He unfolded a single sheet of heavy crested notepaper. Tell Monsieur Poirot that I am sorry, not for the loss of my own life, but for the pain I caused a good man who deserved better than my mistrust. Tell him also that pride is the deadliest sin, and I have paid its price in full. Eleanor Hargrove Poirot refolded the letter with care and returned it to his pocket. Hastings shifted uncomfortably. Poor woman. Do you think she'll ever recover? None. Some wounds do not heal. She will live, quietly, anonymously, under another name. But the Lady Eleanor, who hosted balls and moved in diplomatic circles, is gone forever. The train whistle sounded as they emerged from a tunnel into a wider valley. Far below, the tiled roofs of San Marco
glinted like jewels against the white landscape. Poirot leaned forward to look. "A beautiful city," he murmured, "full of ancient secrets and modern passions. We came for a Christmas ball and left with a tragedy." Hastings attempted a joke. "At least the snow didn't trap us forever, though I wouldn't have minded another day or two of that embassy cooking." Poirot's eyes twinkled briefly. "You are incorrigible, Hastings. But you are right. The roads are open. The world turns again. Diplomats will negotiate new treaties. Young women will find new lives. Proud ladies will vanish into silence. And somewhere in England, the newspapers will record only that His Majesty's ambassador to San Marco died suddenly of heart failure on Christmas Eve, surrounded by friends." He settled back against the cushions. The perfect crime, almost, for Hercule Poirot was there, and the little grey cells demanded the truth. The train gathered speed, descending toward the plains. San Marco receded behind them, growing smaller and smaller until it was no more than a white speck against the mountains. Hastings yawned contentedly. "Home for New Year, then? Quiet celebrations in London?" Poirot smoothed his moustache with a satisfied gesture. "Oui, Hastings. A little order, a little symmetry, perhaps a tisane by the fire. After such disorder of the heart, one craves simplicity." The carriage swayed gently as the train thundered onward, carrying them away from snowbound intrigue and back toward the familiar fogs of England. Behind them, the embassy stood silent in the bright mountain sunshine, its secrets locked within stone walls and diplomatic discretion. The holly had been taken down, the shattered crystals swept away, the bloodstain erased from the marble. The ambassador's Christmas ball was now only a memory of laughter cut short, of a glass raised in toast, of a proud woman's fatal mistake. And somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring for the feast of St. Stephen, clear and silver across the snow. Life continued. Justice had been served. But for those who had lived through that fatal Christmas Eve, peace would never again come as easily as falling snow. The train rounded a final bend, and San Marco vanished entirely from view. Poirot closed his eyes. "Another case concluded," he said softly. And for once, Captain Hastings did not reply. There was, after all, nothing more to say.